What is the difference between the philosophy Emergent Literacy and the philosophy Reading Readiness? Both of these philosophies have emerged and show how children learn the skills of reading and writing. There are 5 different areas that I'm going to compare Emergent Literacy and Reading Readiness in this little presentation. The first one is theory. The theory of emergent literacy says that children are in the process of becoming literate people. That means readers and writers from birth. It begins very early. And they're capable of learning what it means to be someone who can read and write even before they enter school. This is a different philosophy, and it really gives us as early childhood educators the knowledge that everything we do, from reading to them when they're babies, even in the womb, giving them time to see print, see adults using print, doing activities that they can't participate in yet, but they're still watching and absorbing. All of these are important when we look at reading from the emergent literacy philosophy. Now, the flip side is the reading readiness philosophy. And this says that children may not be readers and writers until they master a set of basic skills. They also believe that learning to read is only the outcome of school-based instruction. So if you follow the reading readiness philosophy, you're saying that children, everything that you do until a child gets to school does not matter. And this philosophy was the traditional philosophy historically for many years. But research shows us that it does matter if we read to children. It does matter if children go to Head Start programs or preschool programs or some kind of daycare that does circle time and language activities and reading activities. And all of that happens before they get to traditional school. Now, as we get through here, I will talk to you about a part of reading readiness that is very valid, and it goes back to one of our first weeks in class. So we'll move on from there. Our next part or area we'll compare is how students acquire their literacy skills. Emergent literacy says that children learn to use written language and become readers through active engagement with their world. Literacy develops in a real-life setting in purposeful ways. Pretty much everything you've seen in this course so far, the language experience approach, the dramatic play centers that integrate reading and writing, teachers reading out of big books, they're showing children actively engaged in real learning experiences. Think about those dramatic play centers especially. Let's go outside and have an archaeological dig. Let's take our notepads and take notes and draw pictures of what we see. Let's do a scavenger hunt that has a picture and a word of the things we'll find on our dig. All of those are real world activities. Sometimes when children model the activities of adults, it gives the most purpose. But we are seeing that children become readers and writers through these tasks. The more tasks they're given and the more practice they're given, even before they can do it independently, the better they are becoming readers and writers. Now, reading readiness, on the other hand, says that children learn to read by mastering skills, and these skills are sequenced in a hierarchy according to their level of difficulty. So basically, this philosophy says children learn to read by first learning their letters, and once they learn their letters, they learn the next step, which is letter sounds. And then the next step would be words, and then the next step is sentences. And all the building blocks of reading are put into these steps that they cannot go above the step until they've mastered what is right there. Now, this is that bottom-up philosophy we talked about in our first week when we discussed how we learn to read. And this is how many students learn to read. I learned to read this way, mainly because I was in a school system where we went through our workbooks and we learned step by step. This is valid. It does happen. But here's the problem, something that differs. When we go back over here to our acquisition of literacy skills, we see that children in this area do some things that are different than reading readiness. Yes, they learn their letters and letter sounds and words and sentences, but they might learn the sound SH makes the sh sound because they read a story about sheep, or they sing the Ba Ba Black Sheep song. And the teacher, as she's singing, she writes the SH sound on the board, and they sing it and they make the association. Guess what? They might be 3, 4, 5-year-olds. Reading readiness says, no way, we can't learn SH until we learn the sound of S, and then we learn the sound of H, and then later on down the road, we'll learn about those consonant digraphs that say shh. So what we find is in emergent literacy, students are still learning basics, easy to more difficult, but they're learning them all over the place. Another example of this is students learn through emergent literacy punctuation. They might learn by looking at that morning message every day. Oh my goodness, what are those dots you keep putting up there? They might say to their teacher, well, those are called periods. We use those to stop our thoughts or our sentences. They may not know what a sentence is, but they see you doing it. You're modeling it every day. Traditional punctuation would come much later than preschool or early kindergarten. And reading readiness skills say, no, children aren't ready for that. But our emergent literacy says, yes, they are, if they see it, and then when they're ready to use it, it will be there for them. A funny story, my youngest, she's 5 now, but when she was about 3 or 4 years old, I found myself doing a lot of voice texting when we were in the car or waiting for things, and I would stop my sentences through my voice. So I might say, today is Monday, period. We will go to the store, period. And I was always doing this out loud. Well, my daughter is an auditory learner, so she learns by hearing. So I would hear her walking around the house or telling stories to her siblings, and she would punctuate them out loud, just like I do when I text. This is the point where I learned, wow, that emergent literacy is so true, because the more we surround them with things they don't even understand, they start to model them and do them, and then the understanding comes. So this is really, really different in that level of acquisition of skills. All right, our next area is the relationship of reading to writing. Now, we learned last week that one of the strategies for our linguistically and culturally diverse learners is to read before we write, or flip it and write before we read. Emergent literacy talks about this as being such a strong bond for children to understand the correlation between these two. The emergent literacy philosophy says that children will progress as readers and writers because reading and writing and speaking and listening are interrelated and develop together. And this just makes sense. If you are reading, then you can be writing. And if you're writing, then you can be reading. And we found kindergartners who historically didn't do reading had this great push about 10 years ago to do kid writing. And they were supposed to be writers, but not readers. And we found that every time they wrote, we would put their adult writing, and then we would read their stories in a context that was important to them because it was their words and they wanted to share them. And we found that when these writers got to first grade and started receiving reading instruction, they already knew how to read because they'd done it all along without formal instruction. When we go back to those reading readiness skills, Those proponents say children learn to read first because reading is supposed to be easier than writing. And the skills of reading must be developed before we can write. And I know that's how I learned to read and write. When I was in school, I didn't write other than penmanship. When I speak of writing, I mean the craft of writing, writing down stories and messages. I didn't write in kindergarten, and I didn't write in first grade. And if you look at classrooms now, preschoolers, first graders, kindergartners, they're all coming up with these fabulous stories because we know that writing and reading develop alongside each other. Our next category is the function of formal learning when it comes to reading and writing. Emergent Literacy says children learn informally, and they learn this through interacting with, modeling from literate significant others, and exploring written language. And this is everything we've already discussed. We talk about morning message, seeing print, reading print. We talk about songs and poems in the classroom, dramatic play centers that are integrating reading and writing. I think back to my boys in my classroom, my young boys in my pre-K, kindergarten. They would love to build things, and they would build these fabulous villages or towns out of Legos or wooden blocks. And I asked them one day, tell me about your town. I said, well, let's start labeling your buildings. Let's make streets and road signs. And they got so excited because it was their town, and they started writing street signs, writing stop signs. We see that environmental print. They knew what a Target would look like. They knew what a McDonald's would look like. They knew what their church where their preschool was looked like. And they could add those signs to their own creations. And we're learning informally. They didn't know they were learning to read and write at that very moment. They were playing. And so when we can integrate learning into play, children learn. And this learning is the philosophy of emergent literacy. Now, reading readiness, on the other hand, says children will only learn to read and write through formal teaching and monitoring their skills. Now, the monitoring of skills is important. It's important for you as the teacher to know what they know. We talk about that all the time. But this formal teaching also means more formal assessment. So taking a test to say how many letters you know, and taking a test to know how many sounds you know. And we can't go on until you've mastered all those. This is reading readiness. All right, our last category is the category of individual development. So our learners are individuals, of course. And so we've learned through the last couple weeks that big word, differentiation. And that follows the path of emergent literacy, where children learn to be literate in different ways and at different rates. Every child will be ready to read or write at a different time, depending on their ability, depending on those experiences they've been surrounded by. You can't say, it's your 5th birthday, it's time to read and write. You can't say, it's your 6th birthday, now we're going to do this. It doesn't work that way with kiddos. And anyone who's really, been in classrooms of young learners know that teachers have a challenge because their students are all over the place in ability level. This is so true when it comes to that philosophy of emergent literacy. And it's also fantastic because it allows the teacher to know that they don't all have to be doing the same thing. So this philosophy allows for those differences. Now, when we move over to reading readiness, we say that children progress as readers. Remember, they have to be readers first, by moving through a scope and sequence of skills. Now, this could be the curriculum set up wherever your child is learning, or it could be, unfortunately, the curriculum set up by the textbook. If you turn in a textbook to the teacher's manual, each teacher's manual has a section called Scope and Sequence of Skills. And it's basically that ladder of growing skills that we talk about in reading readiness, starting at the bottom of the ladder and then moving through. In reading readiness, everyone starts at the same spot on the ladder and moves through the same levels. And what this really doesn't take into account is you might have a child who is really great at writing, but can't read very well yet. It doesn't matter. They're place at the same spot. And you can't push them as a writer until they catch up as a reader. We really see that children who understand one thing in reading may not understand another thing. I know some boys and girls have fantastic sight word fluency. They can memorize sight words. But sometimes those same children cannot understand phonics or the sounds of letters. So we build off of what they know, and we drag the rest along until it catches up. That happens so often. And guess what? If we were following that reading readiness philosophy, they wouldn't have that opportunity to be drug along. They would have to wait for the rest to catch up. So, just to kind of recap, emergent literacy is the philosophy that I choose. Just so you know, if you haven't figured that out. Emergent literacy is the philosophy that our whole class is based off of, because research shows that is the philosophy that children respond to best. Reading readiness is the philosophy that was more traditional long ago. It will still work, but it only works best for a small set of the population that is ready when they come to school and probably does have some good prior experiences that they bring to the table. And it's a very average group of learners. You don't have children that are high end or low end. Everyone is about middle of the pack. So reading readiness will work, but in my classroom, we follow emergent literacy. Hope this has given you a lot of information, and we'll continue to learn about emergent literacy throughout our presentation today.